Mike.
All right, now many voters were hit with these long lines at their polling location yesterday. Maybe you stood in one of these lines. Outside the Bingham Creek Library in West Jordan, the average wait 2 hours long.
Well, I got here about 6 and the line was a lot shorter, and I thought, well, maybe if I waited out a little bit it'll get shorter, and it actually just ended up getting a lot longer.
Interesting, huh? At Hunter Library in West Valley City, the last voter cast his ballot, get this, at midnight. That is 4 hours after the polls close. Now, those long lines on Election Day have some Utah lawmakers all fired up. They want to change the law to make sure that every county has enough polling places. Political specialist Ladd Egan live at the Capitol with more on this. Hi, Ladd.
Hi there. You know, when lawmakers approved voting by mail, they also mandated that there still needed to be physical voting locations. But as we saw yesterday, especially in Salt Lake and Davis counties, it's easy to get that wrong and maybe underprepare for how many voters will actually show up.
And if you only have 2 polling locations for 130,000 people, clearly you've done bad math.
Republican Senator Daniel Thatcher reacting to these long lines in West Valley City with the last voter waiting until midnight to cast a ballot.
How many races were affected? How many people didn't get to cast their ballots because of bad decision making from the county clerk?
We're learning that a lot of our voters aren't used to a vote by mail system, and that it was just a growing pain along the way. And
Salt Lake County Election Director Roseanne Mitchell says voters with address changes slowed down the lines and that they tried to add more voting machines and extra workers to keep up with the demand.
a lot of voters were waiting to make final decisions.
Besides the long lines, here's more evidence that voters waited until the very end. Shelf after shelf of mail-in ballots just received by the Salt Lake County clerk. They haven't even been counted yet.
We think it was successful. We think there were some lessons to be learned. We think that we know moving forward there are some things that we can do better.
Election Day is when most people want to vote.
Senator Thatcher says voting by mail is fine, but it should not make it more difficult to vote in person. That's why he's drafting new legislation.
It will set a standard that for each number of registered voters, you must have 1 physical polling location.
That legislation would be introduced at the next legislative session. As for all of those uncounted ballots across the state, I just got an update, and that number is at least 228,000 ballots that have yet to be counted. It could take a few days to get through all of those. And you know, that's actually a big enough number that it could affect some of our local races that are pretty close. The state election office here at the Capitol, they tell me because of what happened yesterday, they are planning a meeting with all of the county election offices to go through what happened yesterday. And you know, Mike, you know, they didn't expect turnout to top 2012, but I'm actually told in some counties it did. They broke records yesterday with turnout approaching 90%.
Such a tricky thing for those guys to know what to do in situations like this. But again, you have all those mail-in ballots, and it seems like the idea was more people were going to fill out the mail-in ballots and send those in, and you wouldn't need as many polls. But as we saw right there, everyone was lined up.
Yeah, and you know, Mike, a lot of the times they were encouraging people to mail that in early. There was a lot of convenience, but people wanted to wait until the end. You know, in those final weeks of the campaign, a lot changed. So you can understand why people didn't want to send in that ballot, because here in Utah, you could not go back in and change your vote once you mailed in your ballot.
Yeah, certainly with this election, you can understand why a lot of people waited to the last minute. All right, Ladd Egan, nice report. Thank you very much. Deanie?